Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni muli wanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Chadley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We're coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted and honored that you are joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is Kathleen Pelley. She is here to celebrate 5 little angels. Before we invite Kathleen into the studio, we want to let you know we have a brand new Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read, ABC by Dr. Terrence Shipman, the latest in Mr. Shipman's Kindergarten Chronicles. We love this series. The latest book in the series, ABC, is fantastic. The book does more than simply introduce kids to the letters and sounds of the alphabet. This book inspires kids and their families to smile and love life. We really enjoyed reading Dr. Shipman's dedication at the beginning of the book. Taking time to thank the people who lift us up is important, and it would be fun to read these words of gratitude to your little ones. Kids who are underrepresented in most books will love to see themselves positively portrayed throughout this book. Everyone will love the illustrations and the smiles found on every page. Congratulations once again to Dr. Terrence Shipman. His book, ABC, is our latest Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read. And if you are the author of a fantastic children's book and would love some help letting the world know all about it, please check out our Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read program. Go to readingwithyourkids.com, click on the Authors Click Here button at the top of the page, scroll on down to Certified Great Reads. Joining us right now from the beautiful state of Colorado, our guest today is celebrating her beautiful picture book. It's called 5 Little Angels. Please welcome to the show, Kathleen Pelley. Kathleen, how are you?
Very well, thank you. Lovely to be here, Jed. Thank you.
It's wonderful to have you on the show. Tell us about 5 Little Angels, please.
Okay, so 5 Little Angels, I think, is my 8th picture book, and it's just been published in April. I got the idea for it a while ago because somebody gave me a beautiful picture of these angels joyfully dancing, and underneath it said, "Angels dance for joy with you, for you." And I thought, as a former teacher, we spend so much time focusing on the negative in our world and our culture. And I love the notion that children might just be enchanted to know that whenever they do a kind or good deed, that maybe that's building heaven on earth. It's all about finding those glimmers of goodness and grace. So that was my idea for it. So it's these little angels who look down on earth, and then every time they see a good deed, they tumble from their celestial perch, but they're all reunited at the end.
Wow. You bring up a good point. There's talk that, a lot of the violence that we see is inspired by other acts of violence, and we hear about, copycats, that one person commits a crime and they get some notoriety and other people pick up on that. Wouldn't it be great if our media could start celebrating these small acts of kindness that are happening in a big way? I know some news stations will do a cute little 30-second thing and about someone who rescues a dog, but to really kind of, have the media, have pop culture really get behind and celebrate acts of kindness and compassion and humanity. Maybe that could be copied and become contagious.
Absolutely. It makes better news, I suppose, to focus on the negative at times, but that seeps into our cultural soul, that Marcus Aurelius said, the colour of our thought dyes our soul, and the colour of our soul dyes our world. So when we're feeding our children those images and those comments about negativity, instead of, as you say, celebrate the goodness, find the glimpses of grace, let it become a habit, instill that in our children. Mm-hmm. And that's what good stories, I think, can do with kids.
You made an interesting choice of words, and I'm glad you did, talking about feeding. When we're being fed this constant barrage of media. And as parents, we don't understand that our kids are consuming thousands of media messages a day. You might be the parent. No, we don't have the TV, and the kids don't have an iPhone, and they're off the screens. Yeah, but they're walking through a community, and they're seeing billboards, and they're seeing, they're seeing television at their friend's house, and they're hearing music and all these media messages, and so many of them they're not reinforcing the values that we're trying to teach our kids.
Absolutely. So there's a lovely African proverb. One of my friends lived in Africa for many years, and it's, what we teach a child to love is more important than what we teach a child to learn. And I mean, any teacher will tell you that when they see a child come into kindergarten that's already been read stories and poems and songs. Seldom will they have any problems with mechanics of learning to read. But it's the same with that as we teach our children to live in this world. It doesn't need to be a subject on diversity, inclusiveness, or it's interwoven in everything we do if we teach our child to love goodness. Mm-hmm. And that's what great stories from the dawn of time have done. They've taught us to believe that good will triumph. They've taught us to believe that goodness is inherent in being a human being.
Yeah. I saw something on your website that what you just said reminded me. You said that you weren't great in history. You weren't able to remember the dates and the places, but you remembered the people because you learned about the people through stories. And so that you learned that was something that was instilled in you and that you really made part of you, whereas just sitting down and trying to memorize facts and dates, that just went out your head. I think that can be true for a lot of kids.
Yeah, absolutely. I loved history. I majored in history, but as you said, I couldn't remember the dates and the battles and all of that, but I remembered the characters, remember the stories, which I think brings up an interesting point in our world today where we have to be so careful. And I totally agree. We have to show children, stories have to be both mirrors and windows. They have to see themselves. We have to see other cultures. But let's not forget why we're showing them that. We're showing them that not to focus on what makes us different. We're showing them that to focus on the human condition, that stories teach us what the human condition is, no matter who we are, no matter our race, where we come from. We all seek goodness in our life. Our heart hurts when we're sad. And that's what we have to bring to children is stories really help them to live in this world because they teach them about life.
Yeah, it is. And I think we forget the fact that story has been around and a lot longer than our schools have been. Exactly. Way before the first book was written, before the first chalkboard was erected, we were learning together around the campfire in a cave through story.
Exactly.
Yeah. You mentioned that you were a teacher, and you mentioned that you were able, as a teacher, to spot the kids who had been read to and who, had parents who were telling them stories. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, I suppose I see it more too, as a picture book author. I've been in schools in the last 20 years here in Denver, and I was a storyteller, not a professional storyteller, but I read fairy tales and folk tales at a low-income school here in Denver for 20 years. And I suppose what I'd say after a lifetime of me being steeped in stories, it's just very obvious when you meet a child who stories are just part of their life. They don't think of it as a separate component. Oh, I must read 20 minutes today. And neither do their parents. It's a part of who they are. I see it in the vocabulary that they use. Mem Fox wrote that beautiful book, Reading Magic, about why reading aloud can cure everything. And in it, she talks about, Winnie the Pooh says, I need a little sustenance. And so when her daughter caught her father in the pantry stealing some cookies, she said, I need a little sustenance. And so that little phrase connected the whole family. So that's number one. You see that this has become part of their lives. I also did a book club for my daughter from the age of 9 to 17. And again, you see this connection where people bond over with books. Children that are read to when they come into kindergarten, well, the studies show, I can't remember the exact numbers now, but children who are read to have like a 1,200 vocabulary word as opposed to 300 words of children that are not read to. That's at a very basic level. I think it's much more than that. It's the confidence and the love of stories that's already instilled in them.
Yeah. One of the things, my daughter and I, we joke a lot. I do educational magic shows around the country, and my daughter through high school would tour with me a lot, and we'd be out on the road. And of course, when you're on the road, all sorts of things happen. And her and I are very good at looking, being in the middle of a storm and turning to each other and saying, this is going to make for a good story. Instead of panicking and freaking out, it's just like, we're going to get through this. And when we do, we're going to be able to talk about it.
That's very nice. I love that. It reminds me too, during the midst of COVID on my own storytelling podcast, I shared with the children one of my favourite poets, or mystic, Julian of Norwich, who said, all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. And that's not, I believe, a Pollyanna disregard for the sadnesses in our life. I think it's what all good stories tell us, that in the end, despite the badness and the madness and the sadness, good will triumph. Yeah. And it's that hope that's also, I think, so important nugget of good children's stories. You might have sadness, but there's a hope that simmers there, and that children can see that hope.
Yeah. I'm imagining, now I'm with you. I'm a lot older than you, but I'm of that, have that mindset that things are bad right now. It's going to get better. I don't feel great right now, but it's going to get better. I feel depressed. I'm sad. I feel lonely, but it can be better. I'm seeing a lot of stuff on social media, and it's good. We're taking time to help people be more open when they're dealing with mental illness and depression, and letting them know that it's important to get help and self-care. But I'm also seeing things, people become angry when you say, well, to somebody, things are going to get better. Oh, you shouldn't say that. How do you know it's going to get better? That's unfair. I don't think it's unfair. I think it's important to give people hope.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes, it's easy to, we've all done it. I do it in my down days, the cynic, and say, well, no, it's not getting any better. Or you, again, that's going back to focusing on the negative. Barring living in, terrible poverty that many places in the country have to deal with. But for the most part, here, we can usually find some little glimmer of goodness. We can usually find something to be thankful for each day to focus on. Again, that's one of the writing assignments that I give to children when I go to schools. I say, if you can write down something you loved about today or something you're grateful for, and you do that every day, you'll never run out of things to write about, and you'll never run out of things to be grateful for. E.B. White, I love E.B. White. Who doesn't love E.B. White and Charlotte's Web? He said, all I want to say in books, all I ever wanted to say is, I love the world. And I love that, because I think maybe that's why we writers can be so hopeful, because I get to look at little glimpses of grace throughout the day. And that's what I want to write about. I want to point to it and say to the child, look, isn't this amazing? And so maybe that's the real grace and wonderful blessing of being involved in children's literature, is that you get to do that.
Yeah. And as you were saying that, not every parent out there is going to be a children's author, but every parent can be a storyteller. And every parent can take the time during the day, no matter how old your child is, and it's probably more important to do it when your child is a teenager, but to point out those moments of hope, those moments of joy and happiness that we all experience throughout a day.
Absolutely. I think that's so important. You said that, yes, especially with the teenagers, you don't stop doing that. Maybe you're not reading aloud to them, but maybe you are. And it's the modelling of that, is saying, oh, look, again, another practice that we used to do as a family, I grew up as a Catholic long ago, and back in those days, you did the examination of your conscience and you looked at all the bad things. Well, we've evolved, thank goodness. And now we have something called the examination of consciousness. It's called examen. And really what it is based upon is look through your day. And you can do this with no faith tradition or whatever faith tradition. It's a good business model as well. Look through your day and think of the moment where you felt most alive, most energized. Think of that. And if you do that over time, you begin to discern things about what you love, and it forms a habit of looking at the positive.
Yes, that is a great practice. I attended a Jesuit high school. And so we learned.
St. Ignatius, then.
Yes, we learned about the examen, and thankfully I attended the Jesuit high school in a more enlightened and progressive time, and so we didn't look at the terrible things we did throughout the day. We looked at those moments that we found God in our lives, and we found joy and happiness and humanity. I know from your website that your father was Irish, and I know story is universal. It goes across all cultures, but the Irish, we seem to have a certain superpower when it comes to story or shoveling, other people would say, shoveling substances we don't want to step in. Do you agree? What do you think it is about Irish culture that, kind of highlights that?
Absolutely. It's the Celtic spirituality. Neither of my parents finished high school. My dad worked 3 jobs. He worked at nights. He was with us during the day. But my early memories are of this man this ingrained reverence for creation. Like in the mornings, not joking, he would never use his normal voice. He'd only whisper so as not to disturb the hallowed hush of a new day dawning. And once when I found a wee baby hedgehog abandoned at the bottom of the garden, we spent the next week bringing little saucers of milk. And then if you walk past, you probably know this, if you walk past a lone bush in the field of Ireland, you have to put your finger to your lips and tread very lightly because you might frighten off the fairy folk. So that was the kind of man that my dad was, where he had this tremendous reverence for all of creation. He would take me he was the one that took me to the library. We didn't have lots of books in our house, but he took me to the library. We lived in a dirty, nitty-gritty industrial city of Glasgow. But every summer, and sometimes more frequently, Dad would take us to his parents' farm in Ireland. And so as a wee girl, that sense of wonder was really instilled in me that the Celtic people have for the earth and for all of creation. And I think the other thing about the Celtic people as a culture, we're not dualistic. I don't think we separate, well, this is, fact and this is fiction. The worlds blend. We kind of believe that the spirit world is with us and that the veil is a little thinner than a lot of us think. And I think we've lost that connection to the earth and to nature. And I was so lucky that I had it as a little girl, but it's a huge connection then to stories. It's just the love of the world and the opening up to the fact that what you cannot see is often more real than what you can see. It's believing in something beyond yourself that I think the Celtic people just have.
That's very powerful. Sometimes what you can't see can be more important and more real than what you can see.
Yeah.
What an interesting conversation you could have with your kids. And it's a conversation around that statement that you could have at different stages, because, what that sentence could mean to a 5-year-old would be very different than your child as a 10-year-old, as a 15-year-old, as a 20-year-old. I want to challenge somebody listening to this to have those conversations with your kid just to see what comes out. I'm sure 5-year-olds could give us some really interesting perspectives on that.
That's a very good idea, Jed. Yeah, I like that idea too. Yeah. And what a great way to involve a family discussion, again, with the examen around the dinner table. What wonderful thing happened to you, or what do you think about that? It's a great way for families to bond.
Yeah. And one of the things, I'm also Catholic, and one of the things that really that I didn't like about that tradition is that this is time for prayer, and you go over there, and now you talk to, and then when you finish, it's, it should be, story should be part of our lives, and the examine, if instead of sitting down and making it a very serious moment, if we just did it together at the dinner table.
Exactly.
And we shared those moments naturally.
Exactly. There's a couple of definitions of prayer that I love, and one of them is a long, loving look at the real, and the other definition is it's a radical response to life. And why I love those is I do that in a presentation I called Picture Book as Prayer, because in actual fact, Jed, I think they have a lot of similarities. Our picture books are to do with beauty and truth and pausing and pondering and reflecting without getting too deep into it. Yes, it's a time to be with your child, but it really is when writers write out of their heart and they're writing about beauty and truth. That's what we're all about in this life, to look for that.
Yeah.
So I love that idea of, prayer's not a separate thing. It's woven throughout our lives. Mm-hmm. And you don't need to be part of a formal religion either. Mm-hmm. It's the human condition to respond to beauty.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 What a... we talk about, soon after we finish speaking, I am going to get on my bike and I'm going to be training my muscles and my heart. And wouldn't it be wonderful if we can train ourselves, and in training ourselves, we can train our kids to exercise that muscle that is looking for beauty in all the aspects of our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. That lovely Vincent van Gogh, or Gogh, whatever you call him here in America, I always share that little picture, of the beautiful night sky. And he said, the best way to know God is to love many things. And I love that, because I think as we're all creative people, but we're here to love many, many things in many different ways. And that's what brings us together. But I love that notion. And children are very good at doing that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I know with my own children as a teacher and a parent, they would make me stop and look at things. I hadn't thought of that. Yeah. The children are our teachers too. Uh-huh.
Well, that's one thing I was just going to say. We always, and here I do it, it's like, we're going to have to teach our kids this and teach our kids this. And I think it's really important for us to remember that there's a lot that our kids can teach us.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. That sense of wonder that we begin to lose as we get older and older. Yeah. When you see children like, they just pondering some piece of beauty before them. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now you mentioned very quickly, and I wanted to get back to it so folks know, that you do have a podcast. It's called Journey with Story.
Yep.
Can you just share a little bit about that?
Okay, sure. Well, as I mentioned before, I spent 20 years at a low-income school reading fairy tales, folk tales from kindergarten through 8th grade. The school's closed, and then we started doing a little bit of stuff on my website where I did video read-alouds, and then one of my daughters suggested I do a podcast back in 2018 before the podcast world had exploded. So, I'd spent 20 years with stories that I really loved, and I had to use public domain stories. So we use fairy tales and folk tales from around the world. We do one every week. I have a wonderful audio editor in the UK who does music and a little bit of sound effects. We have an artist that does a little image for it. And the reason I called it Journey with Story is that when I used to go to schools to talk about my own published stories, I would say stories are like a journey. Mm-hmm. We take a suitcase on our journey, don't we? Well, if you're writing or even listening to a story, you have a story suitcase. And what's in that? Yourself, all the things that you've loved about life. That's what writers put into their story. And then we talk about other little similarities, like your favourite place on the journey, your favourite place on the story. We talk about discoveries. And very much in my podcast now, I nearly always end with saying to children, what's the story souvenir? And by that, I don't mean a lesson. I hate to think of stories are just like a moral lesson, but I think there's a universal truth under all the great stories. And so I say to children, the souvenir of a story is what you will remember, from the French word souvenir. What will you remember? What's the essence of this story? And maybe the best way to give you a little illustration of that, how children get that immediately. Years ago, before I did my podcast, when I was at the school that I read stories aloud to, I was doing actually a junior great book foundation. So it was discussion about a story, and it was Lion and Mouse. And I loved Junior Great Books Foundation because you didn't have a set answer. It was an open-ended discussion. One child in the class, it was me, from the beginning of the year. First, this child seemed somewhat androgynous, didn't know much about the child, found out she's a little girl. Her mother had been a crack addict. She was happily adopted, but she was the tiniest child in her class. Just a little wisp, never said a word, all year long, ever. Well, this day I read Lion and Mouse. You know, Aesop's fable about the little mouse who asks the lion to let him go free, and the lion laughs at him, but does, and then the mouse comes back and frees him. So I read the story. And I said, what do you think this story Souvenir is like? What will we take home in our heart from this story? And this little girl who'd never said a word knelt up on her chair, and she jolted up her little chin to make herself as tall as her classmate. And she spoke in a loud, proud voice, and she said, small people can do great things. I remember tears springing to my eyes. I thought, wow, there's Aesop's words slicing through space and time, and talk about giving her this little dollop of hope, and talk about mirrors and windows. She saw a little mouse, and she saw herself, and she believed in herself. Yeah. So that's kind of segued into from my podcast. To me, the power of stories are something I want to share with children, and that's kind of how my podcast came about.
Wonderful. Well, I'm so excited that you are writing books, that you have this podcast, that you're sharing story and encouraging people and families to develop that same love of story that you have. Can you tell everybody where they can go online to find out more about you and find out about your books and your podcast?
Thanks. Yep. So my podcast is very easy. It's www.journeywithstory.com. It's on iTunes or anywhere you listen to podcasts, completely free. And my website is just www.kathleenpelley.com.
Wonderful. We've had a really, really fun time speaking about stories, speaking about 5 Little Angels, a great picture book from our guest. And our guest has been Kathleen Pelley. Kathleen, thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. Thanks very much, Ted. Thank you. Bye.
Please be sure to join us for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We have 2 fantastic authors joining us. Kelly Sanchez will be here, and also Dr. Stephen Hall. That's the next episode of the podcast. Hey, if you are the author of a fantastic children's book, you may be frustrated at how very hard it is to let the world know about your book. I mean, there are literally thousands of books published, not every single year, every single month. Not exaggerating. Every single month there are thousands of books published. It's really hard for your book to stand out from that crowd. We can help you. We have a fantastic program that's helped so many authors. It's called the Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read Program. You can learn all about it by going to our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Click on the Authors Click Here button at the top of the page and scroll on down to Certified Great Read. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, I want to start by thanking our wonderful guest, Kathleen Pelley. Please be sure to check out 5 Little Angels. You also want to check out a podcast, Journey with Story. I also want to thank my team, Alejandra Doherty, Fatima Khan. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.